Riceville, Iowa. April 1968, 3rd grade. 28 kids are sitting at their desks. Their teacher, Jane Elliott, has just announced a new rule. Brown-eyed children are smarter, faster, better. They get to drink from the water fountain first. They get a second helping at lunch. They don't have to wait in line. Blue-eyed children are not allowed to play with the brown-eyed ones. They have to wear a special fabric collar, so they can be spotted from a distance. 15 minutes pass. One boy, a brown-eyed straight-A student whose best friend until that morning was his blue-eyed deskmate, turns to him and says, "You shouldn't talk to me. You have blue eyes." Within an hour, the brown-eyed children started scoring higher on their tests. Real, measurable improvements. Their reading speed increased. Meanwhile, the blue-eyed kids, who had been doing perfectly fine that morning, started making mistakes, stumbling over their words and crying. One day, one completely arbitrary rule, 0 actual differences. And here is the truly terrifying part. The kids weren't pretending. They weren't playing make-believe. The brown-eyed kids genuinely believed they were superior, and the blue-eyed kids believed they were inferior. Their body language, their voices, their posture, their test scores, everything changed. You could say, well, they're just kids. But I have a question for you. Are you absolutely sure you aren't doing the exact same thing? Every single day, Elliott ran this experiment the day after Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated. She wanted children who had never personally encountered racial division to feel it, not as an abstract idea, but as something immediate and physical. That was the intention, but what the experiment revealed went much further. It showed that a hierarchy doesn't require history, culture, or even conflict to emerge. It doesn't need years of reinforcement. It only needs a line, any line, drawn clearly enough for people to recognize it. In the early 1970s, social psychologist Henry Tajfel demonstrated this with adults. He divided participants into groups using criteria so trivial they should have been meaningless. A coin flip, or a preference for abstract paintings, Kandinsky or Klee. There was no identity attached to these groups, no reason to care about them, no benefit to defending them. And yet, participants began to favor their own group almost immediately. They allocated more resources to us and less to them, even when the outcome reduced the total reward for everyone involved, including themselves. It wasn't about maximizing gain. It was about preserving difference. People were willing to lose as long as the gap remained intact. The pattern is remarkably consistent. Children in a classroom, adults in a laboratory, different decades, different environments. You introduce a boundary, and the mind does not simply divide, it organizes. And within that organization, a structure appears that starts to feel less like a choice and more like something that was always there. To understand why hierarchies feel so natural, you have to stop looking at them as ideas people consciously agree to. They operate more like systems, layers of processes that begin long before conscious thought. 3 of these layers are especially relevant. Gear 1. Biology. Hierarchy is not uniquely human. It appears across species, often in remarkably similar forms. In lobsters, dominance is regulated by serotonin in a way that closely parallels human neurochemistry. After losing a fight, a lobster's posture collapses, its movements slow, and its behavior becomes cautious. The winner expands, moves decisively, and occupies space with ease. There is no reflection in this process, no narrative. The body adjusts first. Robert Sapolsky's long-term studies of baboons add another layer. He found that stress does not simply increase as you move down the hierarchy. The highest levels of chronic stress belong to individuals positioned in the middle, those who had to constantly assert control over others while remaining alert to threats from above. Instability, not low rank, produced the greatest strain. The human brain is tuned for this exact dynamic. We evaluate status almost instantly, using cues that rarely enter conscious awareness: posture, tone of voice, eye contact, timing. By the time a conscious judgment forms, whether you trust someone or dismiss them, the brain has already placed them within a structure. This ability appears early. By the age of 2, children can track dominance relationships and anticipate how resources will be distributed. They expect the dominant individual to receive more, not because they have been taught, because the pattern is already legible to them. Biology detects structure. It does not question it. Gear 2. Psychology. If biology detects hierarchy, psychology stabilizes it. One of the most revealing concepts here is system justification, the human tendency to perceive existing social arrangements as fair, or at least necessary. This is not about ideology. It is about managing psychological discomfort. The idea that the system you live in is random, arbitrary, or unjust creates a level of uncertainty that the mind severely resists. So, the mind does something subtle. It reframes the system as meaningful. This is easier to see in everyday situations. Picture yourself in a meeting. Your boss presents a strategy that you know based on the available data is flawed. You consider challenging it, but something in the room, the tone, the alignment of others, the confidence of the speaker, signals that this is not the moment to disrupt. No explicit rule is stated, no threat is made, but the hierarchy has already been registered, and acting against it doesn't feel dangerous. It feels inappropriate. You stay silent, not out of fear, but because it's simply easier to let the system justify itself. This mechanism explains something deeply counterintuitive. Individuals in lower positions within a hierarchy often defend it more strongly than those at the top, because if the system is reliable, even if it's unfair, it remains navigable, and the mind will always prefer a system it can navigate over a chaos it cannot explain. Gear 3. Culture. Biology detects hierarchy. Psychology stabilizes it. Culture gives it meaning. Every society develops narratives that transform hierarchical structures into something that appears justified. In India, caste has historically been linked to karma. In Europe, aristocracy was framed as a matter of lineage, blue blood as a literal biological distinction. Modern societies tend to rely on a more elegant narrative: meritocracy, the idea that outcomes perfectly reflect individual effort and ability. Different frameworks, exact same function, they convert structure into moral order. Not just this is how things are, but this is how things should be. And once that shift occurs, hierarchy is no longer perceived as a man-made system. It begins to resemble a natural law. In 2014, Tony Hsieh, the CEO of Zappos, attempted to remove hierarchy from his company of roughly 1,500 employees by introducing a system known as holacracy. No formal managers, no job titles, no defined chain of command. The idea was conceptually beautiful. If hierarchy creates unnecessary pressure and injustice, then removing it should allow for free, self-organizing structures to emerge. What followed was not the disappearance of hierarchy, but its mutation. Informal influence networks began to take shape. Individuals who were more articulate, more socially connected, or more confident in group settings gradually accumulated decision-making power. No one assigned them that role, but others adjusted to it. Patterns formed regarding whose opinion carried weight and whose voice was the final one in the room. The difference was not that hierarchy had vanished, it was that it had become invisible. And with that invisibility came a much darker problem. In a formal structure, authority is defined and accountable. In an informal one, influence is diffuse. You cannot appeal against a power you cannot clearly identify. Within the first year, around 14% of employees chose to leave. Many describe the issue not as a lack of structure, but as the absolute inability to understand how decisions were actually being made. The system did not eliminate hierarchy. It removed its outline, and in doing so, made it harder to see and much harder to resist. Jane Elliott created a hierarchy out of thin air in a classroom in 15 minutes. Tony Hsieh spent 1.5 years, millions of dollars, and his own reputation trying to destroy one. The result was perfectly symmetrical. Hierarchy won both times. The central problem is not that hierarchies exist, nor that people seek power. The problem is that the mechanisms we rely on to navigate hierarchy do not distinguish between different kinds of structures. To your brain, a functional hierarchy are like a fire chief coordinating a rescue in an emergency, and a dysfunctional one like an arbitrary boss humiliating an employee in a workplace, produce the exact same signals. There is someone above, there is someone below. Adjust accordingly. The physical response is instantaneous. The critical evaluation, if it occurs at all, is much slower. We are highly efficient at seamlessly integrating into hierarchies. We are significantly less efficient at assessing whether a given hierarchy actually deserves that integration. And in the gap between those two processes, systems of injustice can persist long after their usefulness has expired. Years after that classroom experiment in Iowa, one of the blue-eyed students was interviewed as an adult. What stayed with him was not the structure of the exercise. He didn't remember the rules or the tests. What he remembered was a single moment. His best friend, a boy with brown eyes, turning toward him and looking at him differently, not with dramatic hostility, just with a subtle shift, as if the distance between them had quietly increased, and his friend was looking down from above. And the man said, the scariest part wasn't the look itself. The scariest part was that, for one brief, split second, he actually felt like he deserved it. Hierarchies do not depend only on enforcement from above. They rely on recognition from below. Not explicit agreement, just the absence of resistance, a quiet, almost automatic adjustment to a structure that feels, for reasons we can barely articulate, appropriate. And maybe the only true freedom we have left is learning how to catch that exact second. The second, when your body has already accepted the hierarchy, but your mind hasn't yet.